Have you ever noticed that people from other countries seem to have a better education than the people in the US? The reason it seems like they are more educated is because, well, they are. Many countries like Singapore have an educational system that puts education levels, such as mathematics in this case, a year ahead of the standards of the US. As stated in the article, Common Core and International Failure, written by Cordell J. Abenson. In high school, I became friends with a family that grew up in Taiwan and lived there throughout the summer. They are exceptionally good at subjects such as math and were more advanced in the concepts of the subject than most other students. Also, from my experience in hospitals and other facilities that require high job knowledge, such as doctors, people of descent other than the US are receiving more jobs more frequently than many Americans. This increase in non-American workers is because of the better education people are receiving outside of the US. The standards of teaching in the US, when looking at the Common Core standards, the educational levels of other countries, and career-oriented education are lower than the standards of other countries. In order to show you how countries other than the US have great educational systems, I will first start with why the US education, as Ali Bidwell states in her article, American Students Fall in International Academic Tests, Chinese Lead the Pack, is lackluster. After that, I will then talk about the educational levels of various countries. I will follow that with a little bit about career-oriented education. The Common Core standards may have many pros and many cons, but the overall effectiveness is poor. Some of the pros include the state of Nevada's progress in education after the implementation of the new standards. As Michael Brickman was quoted in an article by Paul Takahashi entitled State Lawmakers Hear Pros and Cons of Common Core Standards, Nevada took a big step forward with the Common Core. One state's success doesn't account for the entire nation as a whole, and that's why Indiana became the first state to abandon the standards once embraced, as stated by Takahashi in the same article. The standards are meant to create an environment where if a student were to transfer schools, they would be receiving the same education in both of the schools. But in my own experience, this isn't how it works. When in high school, whenever my school received a new student, whether they were from the out of state or the neighboring school district, they weren't in the same educational place as the rest of the school. These students would often have to retake classes they had already taken at their previous school or get placed into classes that were for other grade levels. The educational level of other countries vary, but overall, they are higher than the US. Ali Bidwell, whom I previously mentioned, states in her article that only 2% of Americans reach the highest level of math performance, compared to an average of 3% across OECD and up to 30% of students in Singapore and Chinese Taipei. Angel Gurria, the Secretary General of the OECD, quoted by Bidwell saying that 25% of American students did not reach the PISA baseline for level 2 in math proficiency, whereas only 10% of the countries, such as 10% of the students in countries such as Canada, Korea, and South Singapore failed to reach the benchmark. Within the US, there are standards of teaching other than the Common Core that work better. One such standard is career-oriented standards. The Southern Career and Technical Academy is a school that uses the career-oriented standards, and as stated by Emily Richmond in her article, Proof is in, Career-Oriented Education Works, their dropout rate is only 3%, which is half of the district average. Countries other than the US achieve higher education due to the poor standards known as Common Core. Looking through all the scores of the students and the teaching standards, it is easy to see that without looking into it too hard, that the education of many countries is significantly better than the US.